Welcome to Crop Talk, brought to you by Innovative Ag Services, and this is our field scouting special. Each week from March through October, our agronomy team shares timely, boots-on-the-ground updates from across the IAS geography, so you can make confident decisions as the seasons change. Today, you'll hear a quick regional update from our IAS agronomists, including what we're seeing in the fields right now, what to keep an eye on next, and a few practical scouting reminders you can put to work this week. I'm your host, Nicholas Giesman, and this week we're going to focus on fungicide timing, what to look for, and how to stage our crops. But first, let's get it started with a little update from Nick Thompson on the west side.
Thanks, Nicholas. This is Nick Thompson on the southwest side of IAS, covering anywhere from Ames up to Alden. We've had a good amount of rain here this past couple days and in this past week or so. Things are moving along now that the heat's kicking up. We're starting to see this corn really start to take off. And I've even seen one to maybe even two fields start to tassel around here. I think for the most part, we still have anywhere from 4 to 5 growing stages, depending on the field, before we hit tassel for majority of the acres around here. But things are moving along real nicely. As I've been out scouting, I've noticed some common rust start to pop up, which obviously as things heat up, that should slow this rust a little bit down. I've also seen some gray leaf spot and some northern corn leaf blight start to pop up. So it's just important that we get out there and we make sure that we know what diseases are in our fields currently. And it seems like it's going to come a little bit sooner than we expected this year. So get out there and get looking at them early. I'd rather be earlier than later. Like I've said several times, this stuff works more as a preventative cure than it is a curative product. So if you get out there with little to no infection, that's where you're going to be seeing the best result. I'll pass it up to the northwest now, over to Owen and Cleves.
Thanks, Nick. This is Owen Heatland at the Cleves location, covering Grundy, Butler, Franklin, and Hardin counties. As we get to some extreme heat here, we'll really start to see the corn and beans take off. Was in a cornfield this morning that was roughly 5 leaves from tassel, and the bean field I'm sitting in currently is just getting ready to enter into the R2 stage. So we'll start to see stuff move pretty quickly here, but we will see a large range of things. I've seen beans that are barely into R1, into R2, like I said, and as Nick said, he's seen some corn starting to push tassels. I've also seen corn probably 6 to 7 leaves, 8 leaves away from tassel. The biggest things that I've seen this week are weed control. Obviously, we finished up spraying most of the herbicide on beans last week, but we are going to do some respray this week. So to me, biggest thing is get out and look at your beans and see what you have for weed control. Since we did end up spraying a lot of Liberty and List in probably cooler and cloudier conditions that we would like, given what Mother Nature gave us, we did have some struggles in some areas. We did get some bigger weeds because of the rain and not being able to get in. So now would be a great time to look at those beans and see if there's any spots, maybe it's just, end rows, waterways, etc., that need to be resprayed. But go ahead and get that taken care of. And then as we are significantly hotter and more humid, remember the rule of 150, and we may actually have to end up backing down that oil load a little bit so we don't burn the beans quite as bad. As far as corn, really just scouting for disease and stage. And as Nicholas stated at the beginning, we will talk here at the end a little bit about how we're going to stage corn and beans, and then how we determine, how many days or how far off fungicide is. With that, I will kick it up to the northeast with Aaron.
Thank you, Owen. I'm Erin Recker out of the Masonville location. I cover Buchanan, Delaware, and parts of Fayette and Clayton County. Over the weekend, we got some more rain, but with the heat wave coming in this week, things are going to dry up quick and the crops are really going to start taking off. And with that, I know some guys are starting to think about fungicide season, and it will be here before we know it. There have been a few reports of tar spot. From everything I've been scouting, I haven't found anything yet. However, we have had the wet, humid weather with some of those heavy dews and fogs in the morning, which is the perfect condition for it. So it's just a good reminder to be out scouting to see what disease pressure is out there, if any yet, and just starting to think about fungicide pass and making sure we get that application done in a timely manner. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Nicholas in our Southeast region.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for that update. Kind of like everybody else said, corn's moving along, beans moving along. We're wrapping up spraying. Owen kind of touched on that of the rule of 150. I know this week we're trying to get out there and finish all of our spraying up, whether that be the second pass on beans or if we're out there doing some resprays or that last pass on some corn. Just making sure that we're adjusting our adjuvants to get the proper kill without having too much crop response out of that, and then looking at disease in corn and getting ready for that next step, which is fungicide. We're not as far along as the west side. We're still 7 to 8 leaves away from tasseling, so we got a ways over here on the east side, but it's better to be proactive than reactive to planning. So still out there looking, trying to make plans when we're going to get the helicopters in, we're getting the planes in, the drones, stuff like that. So getting ready to make those next plans down the road. Sounds like Owen was out in a field this morning and he said he was, 5 leaves away from tassel. Owen, can you, give us a little run through of how you're out there and, saying, hey, how I'm 5 leaves. How are you finding that?
So to me, the easiest thing is you walk out to a somewhat consistent part of the field and you basically just pop the top of the plant off and then start unrolling leaves. And so you'll start wherever the last leaf basically emerged. So as your leaf is, horizontal, 30 degrees, whatever it is, it's fully out. You pull the rest of the leaves out and then unwrap. And each time you unwrap a leaf, you count it. So I basically had 5 leaves wrapped around that tassel. Now, without getting into the math, it's based on degree days and how warm it is and humid it is. Will depend on how quick you're going to push those leaves out. But given that the next week to 2 weeks looks extremely hot, I would guess that you're probably going to look at 3-ish days. But I would say probably in this weather, 3 days per leaf. So if that corn is 5 leaves away, that puts us at roughly 15 days until full tassel, probably 12 days until flag leaf. And then from there, you can determine on, when you think you'll be spraying, whether you use an airplane, a ground rig, spray at flag leaf, or what your plan is. Is that kind of what you figure, Nicholas or Nick?
That's the one that I use. I like that 3. Now it can change, like Owen said, with that growing degree days, and yeah, it's gonna be a little quicker than in the next 10 days. For sure, it might be that 3, but I always use that as a rough guideline. It gives us a good spot to at least have an idea when we might think without doing the math every day and saying, hey, we actually pushed a little more this day or a little less. Using that 3-day reference is, I think, gets us in the ballpark of where we need to be at.
Yeah, I'm typically basing it off of that 3-day reference. I'd say from the fields that I've looked at and just what I'm gauging off of here in Ellsworth, I'm thinking that we're probably going to be wanting to think about and definitely having those discussions late next week of should we be getting out there early next week and possibly doing fungicide with the way some of these things are moving along, which I think I'm a little further along than you guys are with planting and crop stage, but no, we're definitely coming to that point where stage is going to be very important to us and making sure that we're getting out there at the right time.
We kind of talked about staging. We know we're 12 to 15 days away from seeing these tassels. Optimum timing for fungicide. High disease pressure, low disease, any given year, what's your optimum time to go? And then maybe, with it being cooler and really, having that moisture out there this year, what would be your optimum 2-pass time frame to, get this application timing kind of lined up for the season?
I would say, optimally, I always like to shoot for tassel. If you're doing one pass of fungicide, the best time that research has showed, Iowa State has shown, companies have showed is always at tassel. Now, there's lots of caveats to that. Do you have a machine? Can you spray a tassel? Do you have to spray before? Do you have to spray after? Etc. So I would say, if you're going to spray once, you're going to do it with an airplane, it's probably better to turn it loose a little before than a little after. Now, if we're in a low disease environment, maybe that's a little different, but we haven't seen a lot of disease. I haven't seen a lot of disease, but I would expect with the warm weather and the amount of moisture and now the amount of time during the day that canopy is going to stay wet. I was just in a field and it's still got dew on it. At 80% humidity, it's going to stay like that. That's great for disease, unfortunately. So I would say tassel is probably your time frame. Now, if you're doing a 2-pass, which I know there's some of that out there, Right now, I would target tassel or just a hair before, and then roughly 21 days after that, whether that be brown sickle or a little before that. If it was drier, maybe you'd push that a little bit later. But as of right now, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
With it staying wet in the canopy, and it seems to be the whole next week's going to be about the same as it is today. So you're seeing a lot of hours of moisture in there. Do you think guys are going to start pushing this second pass or a two pass, option this year, seeing this moving forward, or are you going to have some at tassel time and then 21 days after tassel, or what are you thinking we're going to run into?
I don't know that there's going to be a ton of it widespread. I think there'll be more one pass and then scouting. I mean, there are guys that definitely planned on a two pass in certain scenarios. I would say, in late corn, higher yielding, corn on corn, all those scenarios would be first you would look at a two pass. So I think it really just depends on crop and area. I mean, I know as you get to eastern Iowa, specifically northeast Iowa, it's really hard to cover at one time because of the topography comparative to over here. So that's going to affect things definitely too. What about you, Nick, down in that Ellsworth area? You get to some more, even more than here, big square fields. Do you have any guys talking about a two pass down there?
Yeah, so I've got a couple guys, they've been considering several different things here. Just with the early disease pressure that we saw, I had a few guys even try and consider throwing some fungicide in their post, even, which, as we've talked about on the last podcast, you could see a payoff, you could not see a payoff sometimes. It's just tough to see with how small the plants are and the amount of coverage that you need. But a lot of two pass discussions are going on right now with this area. A lot of those long rectangular 80s, there's a lot of low spots where the water likes to sit, and that's where I'm seeing the fields with those low spots and the spots that just have had water in them all year round. That's where I'm seeing the most pressure. Obviously, it could be coming from the excess moisture of this year, the high humidities that we've had as of recent. But there's definitely some discussions on whether it'd be worth it for a two pass. And I just say my rule of thumb usually is I'd rather run an early fungicide pass and then gauge it. It's something to consider. I like to think if we're gonna do a two pass program, let's see how the first one works out first, and we'll keep checking up on it. If that second pass is needed, we'll get out there and we'll get that second pass done. With just the way that the application is here and the prices of everything, I think it's worth it to make sure that first pass is doing what you need it to do. Because we ran into an instance last year where we sprayed some fungicide and it didn't work on the southern rust as well as another fungicide that we had. So different fungicides hit lesions differently and hit diseases differently. So I think it's just when it comes to disease, it's one of those things where you just always have to be thinking about it. I don't think it's something that, unlike weeds where we kind of know what to expect, we aren't 100% sure what diseases you're going to have. We have a very good guess. We have the maps that are showing us where the disease is popping up. But at the end of the day, you could have a map that says that there's no rust anywhere in Hamilton County, but then you go out and you look in your field and there's a little bit of rust in there. Disease, it really takes a lot of time and energy just scouting for it, in my opinion, and making sure that you're making the right decisions. Because just like killing the weeds, if you spray 2,4-D on grass, it's not going to do a whole lot. We hit the southern rust last year with a chemical that does better on those smaller lesions, and we saw a better result out of that. So making sure you know what's out there and you know what you're going to spray on is going to be the most important.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Nick. So we kind of talked about corn and staging corn on that bean field you're in right now. What stage is that? I think you kind of said it was getting close to going into R2. And then do you want to walk us through staging the beans and what, kind of go through that same thing? What's the optimum time to spray, that fungicide pass on your beans?
Yeah, so this one I would pretty confidently say is in R2. Now, caveat that with their 1.7 being planted very, very early. So This is about the only one I've seen in R2. But basically, to stage, you're looking at flowers on the stem and location on the stem. So R1, I believe, is any flower. R2 is top foremost nodes of the plant. And so that continues to change as a plant grows and adds nodes. You add another node to the top, maybe that means that you're back into R1. So R1, R2 can last a while, just like R3, R4 can, they can move quick or last a while depending on how quick the plant is growing and adding nodes. I say that to say basically your best time to spray beans is R3. It's been proven quite considerably through a lot of data that if you're going to do fungicide, the best time is R3, which I would guess we're probably still 2 to 3 weeks away from. The beans usually get to R1 pretty quickly. That's determined by day length. So usually June 21st or thereabout is when we start to get into R1. And then as a plant grows taller, that means that R1, R2, and to get into R3 will take a while. That is your best timing. The one challenge to that is if you're spraying for white mold. There are a couple white mold products out there. They want you to spray at R1 because they are trying to protect the flowers from getting white mold on them. So if you're spraying for white mold, which isn't really a big thing over here, probably more in eastern Iowa where white mold is a little more prevalent, right now would be the timing to do that.
Not seeing so much right now, but I know that's do you push it to go early with that product, or you try to find that optimum time? I think a lot of people split the difference, or depending on like over here, you're kind of at the mercy of the helicopter. When's that helicopter come for most of these acres, or do you have a drone lined up to get there? So a lot of it on that end, just application timing. When is your available applicator actually available and going to get there for you?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Topography differences. Over here, a lot more of that is done by a ground rig, and so I'm sure we'll have a little bit of white mold spraying to go on probably this week, and then we'll probably be a couple weeks before we move into that R3 fungicide time.
That's all for this week's Crop Talk by IAS. Thanks for tuning in. If any of our listeners have questions, feel free to email them to croptalk@innovativeag.com. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss next week's update. And if you know a fellow grower who'd value a quick field snapshot, share this episode with them. For more agronomy resources and to connect with your local IAS team, visit innovativeag.com and follow Innovative Ag Services on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We'll catch you next week on Crop Talk.